Thousands of years ago, and I mean long before the Greeks or Romans were even a thought, someone pressed a little reed stylus into wet clay and honestly changed the world forever. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the legacy of one of the earliest surviving great works of literature ever recorded by human hands, the Epic of Gilgamesh. We're journeying back to the ancient sands of Mesopotamia to explore a narrative that literally laid the foundation for how we, as a species, tell stories. And look, this isn't just some dusty, boring history. It's a vibrant, thrilling saga all about arrogance, deep friendship, staggering loss, and really, the ultimate human quest for meaning. But before we get into the granular details of the plot, I want you to sit back and really consider this question. What was humanity's first great story? Just think about that pivotal moment in human history, right when we first started transitioning from passing down oral traditions around a flickering campfire to permanently etching symbols into wet clay. What was actually important enough to write down? Out of everything happening in the ancient world, what were the themes that consumed our ancestors so much that they meticulously carved them out? As we trace these origins of human storytelling, you're going to see that the anxieties, the fears, and the hopes of the people who authored this tale are surprisingly identical to our own today. Now, to ground our understanding before we meet the main characters, we first need to define what an epic actually is in a classical literary context. We throw this word around a lot today, right? We say a movie was epic, or a sports game was epic, or even just a really good meal. But classically, an epic is a long narrative detailing a hero's deeds. It's a massive, sweeping poem operating on an unimaginably grand scale. You've got divine interventions from capricious gods, incredible geographical journeys across dangerous unknown realms, and a protagonist who fundamentally represents the cultural values of their time. And the crazy thing about the story we're exploring today is that it didn't just use this format, it basically invented the whole shebang. All right, let's move into our first major section, the oldest story. We are looking at the number one. This is it, the singular, earliest surviving great work of literature that sets the foundation for all civilization's myths. It was etched onto cuneiform clay tablets in ancient Sumer, and then it was completely lost, just buried in the sands of time for millennia. It actually wasn't until the 19th century, in the ruins of the ancient library of Ashurbanipal, that archaeologists dusted off these shattered clay fragments and finally realized what they'd found. Just think about the gravity of that for a second. For thousands of years, the literal number one foundational text of human literature, a story older than the oldest books of the Bible or the works of Homer, was buried beneath the earth. Yet its themes invisibly echoed through countless other cultures. It absolutely holds the heavyweight title of first. Which brings us directly to our next section, civilization versus nature. So the whole story hinges on this really sharp, brilliant juxtaposition between two incredibly different figures. On one side, we have Gilgamesh. He's the king of the magnificent city of Uruk. Imagine massive, towering brick walls, the absolute pinnacle of ancient architecture, and total human dominance over the environment. Gilgamesh is supposedly two-thirds god, unmatched in beauty and strength. But he's also bored. He's arrogant. He's a tyrant who abuses his own people without any consequences. On the completely opposite side of the spectrum, we have Enkidu. The gods hear the cries of the oppressed citizens of Uruk, and they decide to intervene. So they create Enkidu, out of clay, to be Gilgamesh's perfect counterweight. Enkidu doesn't live behind walls. He lives deep out in the wilderness. He runs naked with the beasts, he eats grass with the gazelles, and he perfectly represents the untamed, innocent, chaotic forces of nature. The story is clearly telling its ancient audience that civilization, without the grounding force of nature, becomes tyrannical and sterile. But nature, without the structure of civilization, lacks higher purpose. They're two halves of a whole, designed to completely balance each other out. And we can map out the actual narrative journey of these two contrasting figures across three vital, heart-wrenching stages. Step one is the meeting. And while this isn't exactly a diplomatic summit, it's a brutal clash. Gilgamesh and Enkidu finally meet in the streets of Uruk and get into this fierce, epic wrestling match that literally shakes the doorposts and shatters the walls of the city. But instead of killing each other, they fight to a standstill. They recognize their absolutely equal strength, and they form this unbreakable brotherhood. Now, fully complete as a duo, step two takes them to the cedar forest. Seeking eternal fame and glory, they journey together for days into the Forbidden Woods to defeat Humbaba. He's this terrifying, monstrous guardian set there by the gods. It is the ultimate ancient buddy adventure. They slay the beast, they cut down the sacred trees to build magnificent gates for their city. But this triumph turns into tragedy. Defying the divine order angers the heavens, which leads directly to step three, the loss. The gods decree that one of the heroes has to die as punishment for their hubris, and the curse falls on Enkidu. Gilgamesh is forced to watch, completely helpless, as his equal, his absolute best friend, falls victim to a slow, agonizing, wasting illness. He sits by his side for days as the life just drains out of him. The tamer of the wild dies, leaving the all-powerful king of the city entirely, devastatingly alone. Following that devastating loss, the narrative sharply pivots into our next section, the quest for immortality. Because, see, the fear of death drives a new, desperate journey. Up until this precise point in the story, Gilgamesh kind of thought he was invincible. I mean, he was a god king, right? But watching his equal wither away and die entirely shatters his worldview. The sheer terror of non-existence, the cold reality of the grave, it just completely grips him. The fear of death becomes the absolute ultimate catalyst for the remainder of the epic. Gilgamesh violently discards his royal robes. He tears off his crown, throws on filthy animal skins, ironically becoming a mirror image of the wild Enkidu he just lost, and wanders out into the dangerous, unforgiving wilderness. He's no longer a proud king seeking fame or glory to etch his name into history. No, he's a terrified, grieving man reduced to his most primal instincts, desperately seeking the one secret that can save him from Enkidu's fate, eternal life. What Gilgamesh experiences is perhaps the very first recorded existential crisis in human history. It's a profound thought on mortality and the legacy of mankind. Driven by this, he undertakes a journey that pushes him to the absolute limits of human endurance. He wanders to the very ends of the earth, traveling through the dark, terrifying twin peaks of Mount Mashu, where the sun sets. He literally crosses the poisonous waters of death, a sea that instantly kills any mortal who touches it. And all of this just to find Utnapishtim. Think of him as the Mesopotamian equivalent of Noah, a man who survived a great global flood and was uniquely granted immortality by the gods. So Gilgamesh finally reaches him, exhausted and desperate, demanding the secret to eternal life. But he only learns a devastating truth. The immortality of the gods is simply not meant for mankind. We are all bound by a strict expiration date. And this profound, inescapable realization is exactly what makes a story from ancient Mesopotamia feel so startlingly modern. It reaches across the millennia and holds up a mirror to our own deepest, darkest fears about our mortality. So how does it end? Well, physical immortality is a failure. Gilgamesh's agonizing quest to live forever in the flesh ends in absolute failure. To prove he has what it takes to be a god, Utnapishtim challenges him to simply stay awake for 7 days. But, exhausted from his travels, Gilgamesh falls asleep almost instantly, proving just how fragile and mortal his body truly is. Even when he's given a consolation prize, a magical plant from the bottom of the ocean that restores youth, he carelessly leaves it on the shore while bathing. A snake comes along, eats it, sheds its skin, and renews its youth, leaving the king with absolutely nothing. Defeated, empty-handed, and aging, Gilgamesh returns to his city. But as he approaches Uruk, he looks up at the massive, magnificent fired brick walls. The walls he built. And in that moment, the narrative clicks into place. He realizes that true immortality is achieved through legacy. The structures we build, the societies we protect, the lasting impact we leave behind, that is how human beings conquer death. And brilliantly, the story itself is the eternal life. By carving the tale of his failures, his grief, and his ultimate wisdom onto lapis lazuli tablets, Gilgamesh ensured his name would live on forever. He accepted his mortality, and in doing so, he actually became immortal. Let's zoom out to analyze its echo through eternity in our final section, An Enduring Legacy. To put this into perspective, think about the timeline. Millennia ago, we get the Epic of Gilgamesh. Centuries later, the Iliad. Later still, the Bible. The sheer antiquity of Gilgamesh totally reshapes how we view the timeline of human literature. We often think of Homer's Iliad or the ancient texts of the Hebrew Bible as the absolute oldest cornerstones of human storytelling, but Gilgamesh was written millennia before them. It is staggering to realize that when the Greeks were composing the Iliad, the Epic of Gilgamesh was already ancient history. And its influence? Undeniable. Take the story of Utnapishtim, the immortal man Gilgamesh meets. Utnapishtim tells a story of the gods becoming angry with a noisy humanity and deciding to wipe them out with a massive, world-cleansing flood. But one god warns Utnapishtim, telling him to tear down his house, build a massive boat, and load it with the seed of all living earthly species. He even sends out a dove and a raven to find land. This specific narrative predates the biblical story of Noah by thousands of years. The cultural DNA of this single Mesopotamian story was literally carried on the wind, seeding the mythologies, religions, and literary traditions of civilizations that followed centuries and millennia later. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. If physical immortality is impossible, how will your story be remembered? The king of Uruk learned the hard way that you cannot cheat death. You can't take your physical form with you, no matter how strong, how wealthy, or how powerful you are. But you are actively writing a story right now through your actions, the things you create, and the way you treat the people around you. So maybe take a page from the oldest book in the world. If you can't live forever, what are you building today that will echo into tomorrow?